There are cities on this planet that don't appear in any school textbook, not because they're unimportant, but because the people who wrote the textbooks had already decided which civilizations were worth remembering. I've been studying 7 of them, and I can tell you this. Each one breaks a rule we thought was absolute about where great civilizations were allowed to exist. One had better plumbing than medieval Paris, one was larger than London in the year 1050, and it was in North America. One was ruled by a woman who conquered a third of the Roman Empire and almost kept it, and one was built by a people so completely erased by history that we don't know their name, their language, or why they left. 7 cities. 7 moments where the official story about human progress turns out to be wrong. Let's start with the one that a NASA satellite found hiding under a sand dune in Arabia. 1. Ubar, the lost city that fell into its own ground. For centuries, Ubar was considered a myth. The ancient Arab traders called it the Atlantis of the sands. It appeared in the Quran, in the 1001 Nights, and the geographies of Ptolemy. A great city at the center of the frankincense trade, fabulously wealthy, that supposedly vanished overnight, swallowed by the desert as punishment for the sins of its people. T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, spent years searching for it in the 1920s. He found nothing. Explorers for the next half-century found nothing. Then, in 1992, a team from NASA used satellite imaging to trace ancient caravan routes beneath the surface of the Omani Desert. From space, faint lines are visible in the sand, paths worn by thousands of years of camel traffic, invisible at ground level but clear from orbit. Every single road led to the same point, a collapsed sinkhole 30 meters deep in the middle of nowhere. They dug, and they found Ubar. The city had been built over a massive limestone cavern. For centuries, the inhabitants drew water from the reservoir below the city. Then, around 300 AD, they drew too much. The cavern ceiling collapsed, and the city dropped straight into the earth, exactly as the legends had always described. Inside the collapsed pit, archaeologists found towers 6 stories tall, still standing at angles in the rubble, thousands of frankincense burners, coins from Rome, India, and Greece, evidence of a trading network that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. The city was exactly where the old Arab stories said it would be, destroyed exactly as the old Arab stories said it was. Ubar wasn't a myth, it was history that nobody thought to look for from space. Tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? I genuinely wonder how far these stories travel. 2. Cahokia, the American city bigger than medieval London. In the year 1050 AD, the largest city in North America sat on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, just across from where St. Louis, Missouri stands today. Its name, as we know it, was given by a completely different tribe that moved into the region centuries after the original builders left. We don't know what the founders called their city. At its peak, Cahokia had a population of between 10,000 and 20,000 people. London, at the same moment in history, had roughly 10,000. Paris had around 20,000. By every measure, Cahokia was a world-class city in the medieval period, on a continent that European historians would later describe as empty wilderness. The central feature was a pyramid, not stone, earth. Monk's Mound covers 14 acres at its base, larger than the footprint of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It rises 30 meters high. The workers who built it moved 22 million cubic feet of earth by hand, basket by basket, trip by trip, without wheels, without metal tools, without draft animals. At the top stood a wooden building 30 meters long, where the ruler of the city could look out over the entire urban landscape below. Cahokia also had its own Stonehenge, a circle of cedar posts arranged with astronomical precision to mark the sunrise positions on the solstices and equinoxes. Archaeologists who found it in the 1960s named it Woodhenge. The people of Cahokia were tracking the same sky at the same level of precision as any civilization on Earth. Then, around 1350 AD, Cahokia was abandoned, not destroyed, abandoned. No invading army, no catastrophic plague, no volcanic eruption. The population dispersed across the continent, the wooden buildings rotted down to their foundations, and the mounds slowly became grassy hills indistinguishable from the natural landscape. When French explorers arrived in the 1600s, they walked across the ruins without recognizing them. If stories like this are new to you, subscribe to the channel, because what came next is even more surprising. 3. Mohenjo-Daro, the city with indoor plumbing. 4,000 years ago, the most sophisticated urban planning in the ancient world was not in Greece, it was not in Rome, it was not in Egypt. It was on the floodplain of the Indus River in what is now Pakistan, built by a civilization so thoroughly erased by time that when archaeologists excavated it in 1922, they had to invent a name for the people who built it. We still don't know what those people called themselves. Mohenjo-Daro. The name means Mound of the Dead in Sindhi, a label given by the people who dug it up. At its peak, around 2500 BC, approximately 40,000 people lived there in a city built on a precise grid. Streets running north-south and east-west at perfect right angles, standardized brick sizes used consistently across all construction, and a drainage system that connected every house to a covered sewer running beneath every street. Every house had a bathroom. Every bathroom connected to the sewers. The sewers had inspection hatches spaced at intervals so workers could descend and clear blockages. The city had a public swimming pool, the Great Bath, 12 meters long, lined with bitumen to make it watertight, with staircases descending from both ends. Medieval Paris, 4,000 years later, threw its waste into the street. What's even stranger, archaeologists have found no palaces, no temples they can confidently identify as religious centers, and no obvious royal tombs. The largest houses in Mohenjo-Daro are only about twice the size of the smallest ones. The city may have been governed without kings, or with a form of authority so different from what we recognize that we can't find its physical traces. Around 1900 BC, the city was simply abandoned. The Indus Valley civilization, which at its height spanned an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, dissolved back into small farming villages over a few generations. No great final battle, no clear invader, no catastrophe visible in the archaeological record. The drain pipes are still there, the sewer inspection hatches still work. We just don't know who decided to stop using them or why. Have you ever wondered what other ancient cities are still sitting underground, waiting? Drop your thought in the comments. 4. Petra, the city that hid in a canyon for 1,000 years. Most people know Petra from movies. What most people don't know is that the famous Treasury building, the one with the columns carved straight into rose-red sandstone, is not a treasury, it's a tomb. And it's one of approximately 800 monuments carved directly into the cliff faces of a narrow canyon in southern Jordan by a people called the Nabateans, Arab traders who controlled the spice routes between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. The canyon is called the Sikh. At its narrowest point, it's barely 2 meters wide. This geography made Petra essentially impregnable. An army trying to enter in formation would be forced into a single-file column easily defended from the cliffs above. But the engineering achievement that actually sustained the city is less photographed. Petra sits in one of the driest regions on Earth. The Nabateans built a water system of remarkable sophistication. Dams that caught flash floods before they could destroy the city, cisterns carved into the rock in strategic locations, ceramic pipes that ran through channels cut into the sandstone at precisely calculated gradients to maintain water pressure, and collection systems that captured every drop of the rare rainfall and routed it underground. At its peak, this system supplied water to 30,000 people living in a desert canyon. Modern hydraulic engineers who have studied the pipe gradients describe them as technically precise work, that required a thorough understanding of fluid dynamics, achieved without any formal engineering science. The Roman general Pompey attempted to conquer Petra in 63 BC and failed. The city was eventually absorbed into the Roman Empire peacefully, by economics, not by force. When Rome shifted trade to sea routes, Petra's advantage disappeared. An earthquake in 363 AD destroyed much of the water system. The last inhabitants left around the 7th century AD. The city sat in its canyon, completely unknown to the outside world, for over 1,000 years. Then, in 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim, hired a local guide, and walked through the Essek. He emerged on the other side to find an entire city carved into the rock, facades, temples, streets, theaters, intact and silent. He had to keep walking and pretend he wasn't seeing what he was seeing. 5. Timgad, the perfect Roman city. That the Sahara buried in 100 AD, the Roman Emperor Trajan built a city in what is now northeastern Algeria on the edge of the Saharan plateau for 15,000 retired soldiers of the 3rd Augustan Legion. He built it from nothing on empty ground in a single construction campaign, and he built it with the precision of a military operation. Timgad was a grid city, 111 city blocks, each exactly 20 meters by 20 meters, arranged around a central forum. It had 14 public baths, a library with shelves cut into the walls where the scrolls sat, a theater seating 3,500 people, paved streets with raised sidewalks and stone curbs, public toilets, 36 marble seats arranged in a horseshoe shape above a continuous channel of flowing water, and a triumphal arch that still stands today, 1,900 years after it was built, almost completely intact. The city grew beyond its veteran colony as civilians arrived from across the empire, eventually housing 50,000 people. Then, the Western Roman Empire fell, the Vandals raided, and the Arab conquest of North Africa in the 7th century finally ended what remained. The population left. The desert moved in. The Saharan sand slowly covered Timgad under 2 meters of wind-blown accumulation, and there it sat, perfectly preserved for 1,200 years. When French archaeologists began excavating in 1881, they found streets still paved with the original Roman stone. The wheel ruts worn into the pavement by Roman carts were still clearly visible. The library shelves were still cut into the walls. The public latrine still had its marble seats. Timgad is the most complete Roman city that survives anywhere in the world. It's in Algeria. There's a good chance your history teacher never mentioned it. 6. Palmyra, the desert queen who came closest to breaking Rome. In the year 270 AD, a woman named Zenobia looked at the Roman Empire and decided she could take it. She was the queen of Palmyra, a city in the Syrian desert that had grown enormously wealthy as the crossroads between Rome and Persia. She was not a figurehead. She commanded her own armies, managed her own diplomacy, and had studied military strategy the way other rulers studied poetry. Within 2 years, her armies had conquered Egypt, captured most of Asia Minor, and controlled territory stretching from the borders of Libya to the Bosphorus, roughly a third of the Eastern Roman Empire. She declared herself Augusta, Empress. She minted coins with her face on them. She hired the philosopher Longinus as her personal advisor and debated theology with bishops. The Roman Emperor Aurelian eventually defeated her in battle and retook the territory. He brought Zenobia to Rome for his triumph, displayed in golden chains. But then, in a detail the textbooks often leave out, he freed her. He gave her a villa at Tivoli outside Rome, where she spent the rest of her days as a respected intellectual. Her grandchildren, some accounts say, became Roman senators. Palmyra itself was extraordinary. A colonnaded main street 1,100 meters long, lined with hundreds of columns, temples to Bel and Balshamin still partially standing, an enormous theater, a senate house, monumental tombs rising from the desert floor outside the city walls. The Silk Road and the Incense Road crossed here, and Palmyra taxed every caravan that passed. When ISIS deliberately demolished significant portions of Palmyra in 2015, they were destroying something that had already survived 2,000 years of wars, earthquakes, invasions, and empires. The columns that fell in 2015 had been standing since before Zenobia was born. If you want to know more about the civilizations that history decided to ignore, subscribe. This is what we do here. 6. Palmyra, the desert queen who came closest to breaking Rome. In the year 270 AD, a woman named Zenobia looked at the Roman Empire and decided she could take it. She was the queen of Palmyra, a city in the Syrian desert that had grown enormously wealthy as the crossroads between Rome and Persia. She was not a figurehead. She commanded her own armies, managed her own diplomacy, and had studied military strategy the way other rulers studied poetry. Within 2 years, her armies had conquered Egypt, captured most of Asia Minor, and controlled territory stretching from the borders of Libya to the Bosphorus, roughly a third of the Eastern Roman Empire. She declared herself Augusta, Empress. She minted coins with her face on them. She hired the philosopher Longinus as her personal advisor and debated theology with bishops. The Roman Emperor Aurelian eventually defeated her in battle and retook the territory. He brought Zenobia to Rome for his triumph, displayed in golden chains. But then, in a detail the textbooks often leave out, he freed her. He gave her a villa at Tivoli outside Rome, where she spent the rest of her days as a respected intellectual. Her grandchildren, some accounts say, became Roman senators. Palmyra itself was extraordinary. A colonnaded main street 1,100 meters long, lined with hundreds of columns, temples to Bel and Balshamin still partially standing, an enormous theater, a senate house, monumental tombs rising from the desert floor outside the city walls. The Silk Road and the Incense Road crossed here, and Palmyra taxed every caravan that passed. When ISIS deliberately demolished significant portions of Palmyra in 2015, they were destroying something that had already survived 2,000 years of wars, earthquakes, invasions, and empires. The columns that fell in 2015 had been standing since before Zenobia was born. If you want to know more about the civilizations that history decided to ignore, subscribe. This is what we do here. 7. Teotihuacan, the largest city in the Western world, built by nobody. 48 kilometers northeast of Mexico City, there is a city that was one of the 5 largest in the entire world at its peak. Around 400 AD, between 100,000 and 200,000 people lived there, more than in Rome at the same moment in history. It had apartment complexes, a massive marketplace that traded with civilizations across Central America, and 2 pyramids aligned with extraordinary astronomical precision. When the Aztecs discovered the city around the 13th century AD, it had been abandoned for 700 years. They found it covered in vegetation, a ghost city on an enormous scale. They named it Teotihuacan, meaning the place where the gods were created, because they assumed that only gods could have built something so vast. We still don't know who built it. The founders left no writing we can read, no royal tombs with names and portraits, no king list carved on a monument, nothing that tells us what language they spoke, what they called themselves, or why, around 550 AD, they apparently burned their own temples and administrative buildings and walked away from the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. The Pyramid of the Sun is the 3rd largest pyramid in the world by volume. It was built above a natural lava tube cave that runs beneath the city. A cave the builders clearly considered sacred. The apartment complexes that house the city's population show a remarkable equality. No compound was drastically larger than another. Isotopic analysis of human remains shows that residents came from every corner of Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan may have been a city without a king, governed by a council or by a system of power we don't have a framework to recognize. The Aztec emperors made pilgrimages to Teotihuacan. They came to the empty city and buried offerings in the ancient temples that had already stood abandoned for centuries. For 700 years, the greatest city of its time sat silent in the Mexican highlands. And everyone who came after could only stand at the foot of those pyramids and ask the same question we still ask today. Who built this? We don't know. The name is gone. The language is gone. Even the question of why they left has no answer. 7 cities on 7 different pieces of the earth. Ubar swallowed by its own ground. Cahokia dissolved back into the American grasslands. Mohenjo-Daro abandoned with its sewer system still functioning. Petra hidden in its canyon for 1,000 years until a Swiss traveler pretended not to notice it. Timgad buried under 2 meters of Saharan sand for 12 centuries. Palmyra ruled by a queen who almost broke the Roman Empire in half. And Teotihuacan, built by a people without a surviving name, who burned their own temples and walked away from a city of 200,000. Each of them breaks the same assumption, that great civilization has always happened in the same places, among the same people, following the same path forward. It hasn't. Cities have risen to extraordinary heights in the Sahara, in the Mississippi Valley, in the Arabian Desert, and then vanished so completely that the people who came after had to invent names for them. We measure our progress by processors and network speeds. The people who built Mohenjo-Daro's sewers and Petra's water pipes and Cahokia's solar observatory measured it differently, by what could still be standing after they were gone. In most cases, the buildings outlasted everything else. The walls are still there, the names are not. Which city from this list has surprised you the most? Write it in the comments. And if you found something here your history teacher never mentioned, share it with someone who should know. See you in the next one.